Community Justice Response Committee, and it is September 19th, 2022. And I think maybe Julie sent this poem to everyone, but Margie was going to tell us a bit about the author.
Yeah.
Oh, I'm sorry. Get closer. I think Julie sent this program to everyone, but Margie is going to tell us something about the author of it, and then I'll read it.
So after last week's meeting, we were talking and Julie Thomas mentioned this poem and she said, "Oh, I'll send it to you." She really liked it. Of course, I think it's really designed more about prisons than county jails, but she sent it to me and I looked up who the author was. So it was because I never heard of this person, Judge Dennis Chalene. And it said he was raised in Minnesota. He was first appointed to the municipal bench in 1964 by the governor, and he retired after 35 years of service in Minnesota. It said that in the early 70s, he began the first in the nation concept of sentencing nonviolent offenders to community service, cleaning up parks and roadways. And it was considered very controversial and without legal precedent. But now, of course, it's commonplace. And across the nation, and said that he was in 1978, he was invited to be on the faculty of the National Judicial College, where he served as a guest lecturer and remained on the faculty for 33 years. And he was permanently installed in their Hall of Honor. And he wrote many books. He was interviewed on national TV, but he had a different outlook to justice. And it said in 1980, he was interviewed for the National Judges Journal, and they created the framework for what is now known as restorative justice. So
anyway, I think this kind of gives the notion of how it would be good to think about things. And it goes, I want them to have self-worth, so we destroy their self-worth. We want them to be responsible, so we take away all responsibility. We want them to be positive and constructive, so we degrade them and make them useless. We want them to be trustworthy, so we put them where there is no trust. We want them to quit exploiting us, so we put them where they exploit each other. We want them to take control of their lives, own problems, and quit being a parasite on us. So we make them completely dependent on us. We want them to be nonviolent, so we put them where violence is all around them. We want them to be kind and loving people, so we subject them to hatred and cruelty. We want them to quit being the tough guy, so we put them where the tough guy is respected. We want them to quit hanging around losers, so we put all the losers in the state under one roof.
And I'm sure people are have mixed responses to that poem. And he uses words that, we probably don't like to use or don't use ourselves in the criminal justice system, but we all know people who use those words for people who are in the criminal justice system. And so, I think the idea is about empowering people, reforming them, and that's what we're here to do. So when Lee and I were talking about the agenda, we thought it might be nice to start with that. So everybody has a copy of the agenda in front of you. We were going to I know Jeff Cocker loves nothing more than to sit around all night at a meeting. And so I thought about putting him at the end of the agenda, but then I thought, no, I love him too much. I'm going to put him right up at the front, let him get in and out of here to go home and do all the things he needs to do. So Jeff has an update. I think he was at the county council. Come on. And they asked him to come and give a little update to our committee.
Well, and we were talking about the upcoming bond anticipation note, which is going to be required as we move forward with the purchase of the property on Fulton Pike. Can you hear me? Is this better? Oh, that is better. We were talking about a bond anticipation note to pay for the property because one of the approvals for that was on the council agenda last week. And so I had I told them that the bond anticipation note was going to come fairly quickly after that. And so they wanted me to give a brief discussion maybe about that. And since I know that I am probably one of the few people who really like talking about bond anticipation notes and bonds stuff, I thought I'd throw in some other, some maps and some things so you can kind of look at where we're at in the process of evaluating the property. And that was when I asked the friends at Technical Service Department if they could let me share my screen. I have become a panelist and now I can share my screen. Now this first slide, let me see if I can. That's so it looks a little better. There we go. This first slide, one of our consultants we had is doing a site assessment to see where the usable ground is and where it is not. This first slide is kind of a picture of in the area in green is approximately 30 acres, and that is the areas with a 12-degree slope or less, which when we look at it for planning purposes, building purposes, you're allowed to build on 100% of that. The yellow is between 12 and 18% slope, and for every square foot you use of that, you have to preserve a square foot that you can't use for that. So if you look at the total buildable area under those guys, is we have approximately 35 acres of buildable area. I will say that nothing on this map or anything we've looked at was all that surprising when we walked the property earlier this year. And if you drive by it or anything like that, where there are trees is pretty much not buildable. Where there's not trees is pretty much buildable. And that's kind of carried through as we've looked at this. Now on this image, you'll see kind of a irregular shaped building. That is the Hamilton County Jail. That is the footprint for that facility. We wanted to put that on this screen so you can just kind of get a feel for what kind of space their facility takes. I went on that tour. My feeling was that we could probably have a more efficient use of ground and probably have an even smaller footprint than that on ours. But that's what that represents.
Is that footprint just for the jail? The whole complex, including the work release and the women's prison?
That's just the jail facility.
Okay, so just for the men.
Correct.
Okay.
That, well, all that whole building, we did not go through that whole building. But the areas we went through is included, and there are other aspects of that building that's included. It's about 2.5 acres, the footprint of that building. That is not placed on here in any specific rhyme or reason. It was just to show, when we look at the total buildable area, how much that facility uses. That facility was built in stages, and I believe it has 519. It can house that many beds. So just kind of wanted to see, where we're at. None of this was surprising to me. As of this point, we don't really have any huge red flags moving forward, but we still have some work to do. We're on the commissioner's agenda for Wednesday. We're going to have a technical service come in and have a contract for them to do soil borings throughout this property to see what the buildable subsurface is and make sure it's all able to be built upon. And I had a meeting with our environmental and DLZ. This Vet Environmental has done a phase 1 and phase 2, as well as the jurisdictional water studies. It's all, I think is that all available to everybody through the Dropbox? If not, let me know by email and we can get your email to Kim Shell and she can include you in that information. So we did get our jurisdictional waters map, and this map is quite large, and so I'm not sure we'll be able to see it. I kind of like the map, so you're going to get a few of them. But I guess this view here encompasses virtually all the area that we consider to be buildable. If you look to the area that is actually east, but if you read maps like I do, it looks like it's north on this. So the top of the map, you'll see some highlighted areas or different colored areas. Those represent conservancy easements that are already on the property. And so this is just another look. And if you look at the blue with the slash lines, those are all wetlands. We think that while the wetland in the middle probably would be a problem if it was in the middle, we have some very nice wetlands along the interstate with a lot of biodiversity, and we can move those wetlands to that area and maintain that still on the property. So that's the pretty part of the presentation. Now I'm going to talk a little bit about the financing and what we're looking at for the bond anticipation note. There is something, I believe there may be, I think the commissioners are going to look at this on Wednesday, and then the council would look at it at their next meeting. Yes.
You said that the green part was trees, pretty much, on that first slide.
First. No, the green on the slide is what's not wooded. So
I thought the green was buildable.
the green, this green is buildable.
And those are
And,
trees in there and wetlands?
No.
The trees and things are all here.
Outside. Okay, gotcha.
And there is a wetland predominantly, right, there's a good sized wetland here. And then there's some wetlands over here and some sinkholes, some karst features. So the thought is that, you know, we would move this wetland. There is a process for this that's fairly involved with the Army Corps of Engineers, and we would see about moving some of that wetland potentially over in this area as we move forward.
And I'm sorry, as to the karst features, did you say you have a geological study, or you're going to?
We have an initial review of the geologicals of sinkholes. We are going to do a geotechnical kind of idea that's not really looking at that. It's looking more at what the soil and the subsurface is to make sure you could build a jail or related facilities on that site, make sure that the ground will support it and those kind of things. When the state built I-69, they did a pretty intensive karst study of this site. Unfortunately, when they published it, it's all redacted. And we believe that's because we don't want, they didn't want people to splunker into those areas and get caught underneath in some kind of underground cave. Our vet environmental is reaching out to the person who conducted that study to see if we can't get some of that information. So we're still working on that.
Do you have an estimate of the amount of space that you would need to co-locate all of the justice buildings? So far, it's just been the jail, but the courthouse, probation, community corrections, the parking garage, public defender's, prosecutor's office.
Well, we believe, well, if you look at a map, those are all currently housed in about 2.5 acres of ground in downtown, right? So that, I mean, that's essentially what you're looking at. If we were to co-locate all those out there, it would, we would have room, but that they wouldn't all be one floor buildings. So we would have to have multi floors on some of those other facilities. And this is a good segue into the bonding, because I think if we're going to estimate the cost of a jail, we are looking at $50 to $60 million just for the construction of the jail. And when I say jail, my vision, and this is just my vision, is for a jail with the sheriff's department moved out there and a couple of courtrooms and related offices for the courts, and potentially public defender and prosecutor. So just that would be that $50 to $60 million. We're looking at using the economic development income tax that the city had approved earlier this year. And that could support 70 to 98 million in financing. I would say that 98 is, you're running a risk there with that, because that would be a 110% of that. We would have revenue coming in that would equate to 110% of that debt payment. And that is much closer than we like to run any of our bond coverage of things too. We're typically looking at, when I started, we were looking at a minimum of 1.25, that ratio. And really in the last 5 to 10 years, we really would like to have a 1.5 revenue per bond payment coming into a fund in order to make sure we never have to utilize our debt reserve fund or a property tax backup to the financing. So in order to build what you were talking about, you would have to you would build your phase 1 first, which would be what I described. And then you probably have to wait 5, 10 years in order to get the funding up to the point where you could bond for additional buildings and facilities. So that would be, in my mind, what you're talking about. We could decide that today, but that decision would still be able to be changed within the next 5 to 10 years until that bonding capacity got built up. I certainly would expect that when we master planned it at the beginning, we would master plan it so that we would know where those things could go. But I'm not sure that making a decision of whether they need to move out there right now is necessary. And if you feel it is necessary, then I'm not sure we'd ever put it in stone until we could actually afford to build those additions.
And so the 50 to 60 million, you started to list them for me. It would be the actual jail, the sheriff's department, the public defender's office.
No, I would think there would be a couple courtrooms and then some smaller spaces that would
Just a
support.
satellite
uses.
office.
Just a satellite.
Yeah.
office.
Like a probably a satellite office or some kind of space that could be utilized so that they could work efficiently.
So Jeff, you're essentially saying the max we could bond would be 70 to 98 million makes you uncomfortable because there's not the coverage. And the first phase would be just that correctional center, a couple of courtrooms, the sheriff's department.
I think
And then
that,
the rest of the stuff would stay downtown until such time.
I
as
think
you had
that's all you
additional-
could afford to do, unless you want to look at additional revenue streams.
Okay, and that's based on, you're getting that information basically from DLZ?
No, I've gotten the amount of the bond,
Yeah,
the bonding capacity from
From-
Financial Solutions Group.
but in terms of the cost of the building, are you getting that from DLZ?
Their estimate was 50 to 60
Okay.
for the building. I'm not holding them to
Yeah,
that, right?
sure.
That is just
A rough figure.
what should we expect? And, they said 50 to 60 million. I kind of thought that may be low, right? Because I think with the economy and the way building costs are going up, this is not an easy drywalled building. This is a secure building that's going to require steel. It's going to require a lot of concrete blocks, those kind of things. I think that if we could get out for 50 to 60 million dollars, we should be pretty happy with that construction cost. Now, that's also bearing in mind, we don't know how large it's going to be or anything like that. I think when he asked me those questions, my response was, I think that the minimum, or I think that we would want to build out some now and have some room for later use. Looking at our population, it's running about 250 to 225 to 250.
Staying pretty consistent, 230 to 240.
Okay, so if you take 230 to 240, what you really need to build is that to be 80% of your total ability to hold people, because you need that additional 20% so that you can guide people into safer confinement. And that's one of the things that has been stressed to me since we started looking at these facilities. And that was probably what we toured Martinsville 10 years ago, right? And that has been stressed and nobody's kind of veered from the 80% is functional capacity and you shouldn't go over that. So that 50 to 60 number is based upon around 350 beds and with the built out shell of the building to house up to 500.
So Jeff, if we're running 240 now,
Mhm.
you add another 20% to that, right? So you're at like, that's another 48.
So you're at 300.
So about 300
Mhm.
if the number stayed. I mean, obviously,
Well, and then you got to worry about peak times and,
Yeah,
and how do you handle it? You don't build it for peak times, but I mean, it doesn't take a long memory to know that our facility has housed 300 people on a regular basis for a year or two, right? I mean, it's one of those, that's not an area we want to go to. It's not an area we want to get
You
back
might
to,
ask that
but,
question,
but
yeah.
you know, that's all kind of goes into the calculus of what size facility we really need. And
Um,
thankfully, I don't get to make that decision.
So tell me, Sam, at our lowest point, what was when COVID was a thing, and what's been our lowest, capacity when we really were like a low number?
Excuse me, our lowest since COVID or during COVID, we were about 185 for our lowest. And prior to COVID, we were running about 280.
What was the other number?
Prior to COVID, we were in the 280s.
And I guess in my mind, when you look at it, you'd also want to look at secured beds versus trustees and how those things are different. I mean, there's just a lot of things to analyze when you look at that. So
280 plus 20% is 336.
yes,
Is it already been decided that the economic development income tax funds are the source of money for this purchase?
well, I think that's ultimately a county council decision. And so in essence, it has not, but I think we talked about this at when the enhanced communications with the council and commissioners, we are moving forward with getting documentation ready to utilize that for the bond anticipation note. The bond anticipation note would last would last at least 18 months based upon that revenue, but could be paid off in as little as 12. I think at that point in time, the hope is that we would be ready to roll that into a larger bond utilizing our building corporation. And then you could revisit the funding source at that time. All right. So the bond anticipation note is essentially to pay for the land, and there's probably be a little extra cushion in there that we could utilize for any of the costs we've had in investigating the property or any of the costs we will have in future review and design of the facility or the site.
So how long would the commitment of funds be if we were to use it to pay off the entire project?
I would assume, and I can double check, but that's probably a 20-year bond.
Yeah. Okay.
And in our last budget night, we moved everything out of that edit fund
Yeah.
based on the FSG recommendation.
I think I hit everything on my slide.
Well, perfect timing. I gave you to 4:55. You're like, perfect
I mean,
timing.
if you guys have any questions, I'm more than happy to answer them. I kind of feel sometimes I'm pushed in this hole where I get all this information and I don't know how much I've gotten out at times and how much needs to get out. So if you guys have questions, I'm more than happy to answer them.
Can you review again the upcoming presentations you'll be making about this topic to the commissioners and the council?
Well, I think at this point, the next set of topics will be the bond anticipation. I think we're going to go to the county commissioners. And again, I believe it's Wednesday, but today was Monday and it's been a long day. And I think I have it on for Wednesday where they are going to say, yes, this is a good use of the edit fund. We still have to do an edit plan, and we'll have to do that before it closes. We have a draft plan that internally in the legal department we're looking at. And so it's fairly simple. So I don't think there are going to be a lot of issues. Part of it was waiting on kind of what the council was going to do with the budgets and things like that, because there were rumors floating around. That maybe this, maybe that, maybe something else. So once that got finalized, and I think it's to that point now, I think we could really proceed and move forward. Again, we just need to have that in place before we close on the bond, because we have to have that in place in order to receive the funding. Otherwise, it's not usable to us. So the first reading of that and it's a ordinance and an appropriation ordinance for the council will be at the September 27th meeting, with the final approval scheduled for their October regular session meeting. That way, as we go through the rezoning process with the city, once that rezoning occurs, we can go ahead and utilize that money by the end of the year and purchase the property. If something happens and none of that occurs, then we're not putting any site-specific, property-specific into the ordinances. Council still has to approve if we purchase any properties. They have to approve all that, so that if we had to pivot at some point in the future because of unforeseen circumstances, we could still utilize that for that. We're also including the ability to do some of the, site review and site design in case something happens and we had additional funding there to it. I think the plan is to move forward like that, but we're definitely making sure that there are things in that allows us to utilize that funding for property or something like that if something falls through, because it's a real estate transaction that still has to go through a rezoning process.
Is there an estimated completion date based on just the phase one that you presented? And second follow-up question, how quickly would we be able to build or expand if we needed additional bed space?
Well, I think I can answer the first question, and I'm going to answer it with the caveat that this is kind of my vision in my head of what I think is a aggressive but potentially reasonable timeline. I think if we could purchase the property by the end of this year, I think we should be able to have a facility designed within 6 to 8 months. I think if we could go out to bid late or around this time next year, if not now or October next year, I think we could begin construction, and with the thought we'd be open in 2025, probably towards the end of 2025, for just that portion of the facility. Now that is aggressive. I mean, there's a lot of decisions to be made, and I think the size is one of them that's already been brought up tonight. I think that's in my mind is probably the biggest decision that needs to be made. Then I think it relatively soon it may be beneficial to start getting RFQs out for design professionals and things like that. Make those decisions, get somebody on board, somebody that could come to these meetings and, when you guys have thoughts, be able to tell you what that means in terms of, natural lighting and those kind of things. And I know that there's been a lot of discussions about aspects of the jail that I think can only be helped if you had someone who had experience in building a facility, be able to react to it and tell you why that's a good idea or what concerns to have with those kind of ideas. I think that would be helpful as that moves forward.
And then in terms of expansion, what we heard on the Hamilton County Jail was in 2022 dollars, it's something like $15.6 million for them to build one of those pod systems. Of course, that's in 2022 dollars. So if this is 5 years down the road or whatever, you need to factor in whatever inflation is going to be. And if we're still having difficulty getting supplies and things like that, I mean, that's why there's so much concern about putting a price tag on this, is because we just don't know a lot of this stuff. But I think that's what I asked the question of, what would it take to just build just this pod system alone, not any other building, just this pod. And it was in 2022 $15.6 million.
And I would say that that cost did not include their medical wing. It did not include their kitchen. It did not include, a lot of other things that you have to have.
Can I just clarify on the cost you were just citing, was that to basically fill in the shell? Is that to make sure I understand what we're talking about?
I would need to go back and clarify the answer to that question, but my understanding was it was the warehouse building and then putting in the pods into that warehouse building.
So it might be different if we built the shell now and then filled in the shell later.
Yes,
Okay.
and it's not a given that we will build a, what you call that system, the pod system.
Right.
That's not a given.
Sure.
We still need to go through what I think you described as like kind of a master plan, which
Mhm,
I think would be really helpful.
So
I
let
would-
me, Jeff, have you ever heard anybody talk about, is it a foregone conclusion that you always need expansion, expansion, expansion? Because you'll remember when we started this process with the criminal justice consultants, we were saying, we want to change processes so that we need fewer beds, not more beds. Just to make the assumption, I'm going to play devil's advocate, just to make the assumption that we will always need to expand, we will always need more beds is not consistent with the way this project started.
I guess my feeling is that the goal would be that we wouldn't
Mhm.
need more beds, but then we'd have a build out space
Yeah,
for
you have the
when,
capacity.
these things are hardily built and they're roughly used, right? So assuming we never needed any more space, we would already have the ability that when we needed a new facility, we've got the space built,
Yeah.
we've got the plumbing there, we could just order the new pods and put them in and then move everybody from one half of the building to the other half of the building, and then we could kind of gut the other half of the building and prepare it for 30 years later when we need a new facility. That would be the ideal situation. I know when we were in Hamilton County, they were using the unbuilt out
Mhm.
space for storage of a historic bridge. And, being able to have that kind of space and utilize it for storage
Mhm.
isn't a terrible thing for the county either.
No,
right?
yeah.
I mean,
Having flexibility is a good thing. I'm just wondering if there's ever, is it a foregone conclusion? And maybe this is a question for everybody around this table. Is it a foregone conclusion that you will always need to grow your jail?
I think there's always there's a foregone conclusion that the building will wear out,
Yeah,
whether you
that's-
need it
sure,
or not. And
everything
so
does.
having that space available would be nice.
Yeah. Judge Tucker?
Catherine is fine for this. I can't answer, of course, for the criminal judges and the criminal half of the Board of Judges, and I can't speak for any of the Board of Judges. I can just speak for myself, but I can say that we have to work within the confines of Indiana state law.
Sure.
So if we were also the legislature, we would have a bigger impact on what is a crime and on how things go that we don't necessarily have. So we can do a lot at a local level, and I'm not in any way trying to say we can't. I think we should, and we are, and I'm glad to be here as a partner and working on that. But at some point, we don't have as much control as maybe some people think we do.
I have not talked about transportation. Julie and I met with the Bloomington Transit, their leadership, and talking about this site and their ability to service the site. And I want to make sure that I'm very clear on this. They did not want to make any statement as to whether this is a good site, bad site, anything to do with the site itself. That's not their business. Their business is servicing site. If this gets through the rezoning process and this becomes a site, they entered a great willingness to work with us in making that site viable for Bloomington Transit and having transit access to the site. They had some really interesting ideas, which I think we should probably reach out to them as we go through the master planning process of park and ride availability on this site. So they were fairly supportive of if this becomes a site that we could work out the details and they would be able to serve the site.
Any other questions for Jeff? Thanks, Jeff, for being
Nope.
here.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you.
Let me stop my
Um,
screen share.
All right, we are going to move on to our main discussion. We touched on a lot of different topics at the last meeting. And so what I wanted to do at this meeting was go around the table and get your sort of survey you. And I don't know who wants to start. Lee, if you want to start, or Kate, if you want to start. I thought we would go around the table and hear from each member. And I'm going to record your thoughts based on the questions that were in the, you can either use, we're going to do this so that everybody gets a chance to talk. While you're talking, you're either holding Ruth Bader Ginsburg, because she's my favorite, or my kaleidoscope. It's going to be a magic wand today. So you just pick, and whichever one you pick is the one we're going to start with. Kate, we're letting you go first. Okay, so I'm gonna ask you these questions, okay? We touched on these subjects in the last meeting, and I want to hear you, and I could have sent a survey model, but I want you all to hear what other people are saying. So we're gonna go, Kate. Last week we talked about, do you want subcommittees of this group? Should we have subcommittees of the CJRC? Should we do it now? If we have it, should they be later, or should we never have it?
Yes.
Yes. Okay. Yes, I'm gonna take that as yes. Subcommittee.
Yes, I think though we should outline targets or goals for
Okay.
each, because I think there's a lot of
You mean
risk
these, like what subcommittees?
within. So once we've decided what they are, what exactly is subcommittee X
Yes.
aiming for?
Absolutely. We'll get there, but at
Okay.
this point, we're even just trying to figure out, do we even want it? Because some people
Yes.
are like, yes. Okay. So you say, do you say yes now or yes later?
No.
Now, okay. Okay, subcommittee structure on your agenda, I suggested, and looking at what Ethel said for us in terms of committees, she said we should have a leadership committee. We've been talking about facilities. We also, you remember, we were talking about when we first got started with this group, we had two commissioners and 3 council members. And the judges weren't at the table, the prosecutor not at the table, jail commander not here, sheriff not here, public defender's not here. We decided everybody should come here, but one of the reasons that that other group was supposed to be meeting, between June of last year when we got the reports and now, was to talk about case management, process diversion, alternatives. And then Lori's group already has a substance use mental health committee, so we could join that committee. And then we've got community voices for health. We could support community voices for health for others. So basically, I want to know, do you like the idea of having a leadership committee? And I've got it down on the agenda, who that would be. That would be a council member, a commissioner, and a health, because our focus is a health focus.
The description at all.
So, about what the committee is?
Yeah, the leadership committee is on health.
Well, the focus of from like 2.5 years ago to now, we have been thinking about reformation, thinking about health, rather than sort of punitive measures, really working to, and that's what you guys do every day, basically try to tailor make your orders so the person sort of gets up and back on their feet.
I do civil justice.
Yeah, I'm saying they generically, judges. And again, we talked about Article 1, Section 18 of the Constitution being focused on reform. It's what probation says they focus on is, how to help the person to get back on their feet. So the idea, and this is just for conversation, these are not decisions that are made in stone, but it's for conversation today. Eve Hill suggested we have a leadership committee, and I suggested on this agenda that we have a council member, commissioner, and a health group. And so what I want to know is, do you like that idea or that committee? Yes or no?
No,
No. Okay. And who would you have on the leadership committee?
I would have this committee be the leadership
Okay,
committee.
so you would have it be the CJRC.
I thought that's what we were.
Okay. So what about a facility subcommittee?
Sure.
Yes. What about a case management?
Yes.
Looking at processes? Yes.
Yes,
Yes.
yes.
Support community voice for health is a yes.
Yeah, I have to leave for that meeting in a little bit.
I know. I think Julie's supposed to be there. I'm supposed to be there. Okay. Any other thoughts? Any other random?
Not right now.
Okay. We talked at various meetings about having outside, bless you, whoever's speaking, outside entities come to this meeting and give presentations. Do you like that idea
Yes,
as a use of this time?
yes. I think I
Do you have
said that.
anybody in particular? Like example, we've talked about law enforcement. Anybody else like that? We have already had center stone. If you have any random thoughts.
I apologize. I wasn't ready for that. So, but yes, I'll think of something.
Yes, Kate's a yes. Okay.
Holy cow.
I know, yeah, we're gonna go around, so yes, so this was, so number of beds, would you want more beds than we have now? in a jail?
No,
Okay, not more, would you want less or the same?
less.
Okay.
Now,
Pardon me, co-located, that means courts, everything goes to a new facility, courts, prosecutor, public defender, the whole shebang moves out of town, downtown and goes. Or as Jeff was saying, we have the admin downtown for now and the correctional center elsewhere. Do you have a vision for that?
I have an opinion that is not very well formed, so I don't, I mean, I think we should have the very least some things co-located.
Some, okay. So you're kind of tending towards co-location, maybe.
I don't necessarily think we should abandon downtown either, though. So maybe I'm more of it's an or question with a yes or no answer, and I'm confused.
You're gonna be here. You're undecided.
Yes,
All right, I
I'll
made a
be-
new category for you.
Thank
For
you.
Anybody, you just might be a trendsetter. Okay, prosecutor's office is collecting data. The courts and probation are collecting data. We're using Eric Rahman for the prosecutor's office, Mary Northcutt Beaumont. I've asked both researchers, they have access to the jail data. They're not actively using a lot of jail data now that they say everybody's been cooperative, they have access to it. We do not, at this point in time, have any public-facing dashboards. You can't like go
I
to a
know.
website and say, hey, listen, do you think we should have integrated data collection and public-facing dashboards?
yes.
Came up at last meeting, it was suggested we have something on the website where the public can come and say, hey, this is my input, this is my public opinion. I can click
Yes.
it. Yes? We also talked about using somebody like the Indiana Institute on Disability Community to do surveys.
I'm open to that.
You like that?
Yeah.
Okay. What about developing long-term relationships with IU for research and clinics?
Yes.
Yes? What about doing this public outreach session? Do you think that's a waste of time because we've already done it, or do you think we should do it?
I think we should do it. Assuming I understand what it is, but yes.
Thank you. You were the guinea pig.
Yes, and now that you've explained all of them, it might be faster to ask everybody A and just be like, boom, 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 boom. boom,
I
boom, boom.
wanted to, the first time around, I wanted to, good idea, but I'm going to sort of explain.
Okay, yeah,
Now
sure.
go around. A, subcommittees, Lori, now, later, never.
I was torn between now or never. And I think some of that is having a good understanding about what the subcommittee structure looks like. How many additional people are we bringing in? How long is that going to last? What does that picture look like?
That'll be up to you guys to decide, but we were even at the fork, we were at the fork of the road, like, some people were like, I don't even want it, so we need to know, just generally, what you've got to say. Assume they're gonna be
never.
well-informed. Oh, no, you say never? You like
Yeah.
staying with this big group?
Yeah, if we're going to be getting public outside input, if people are going to be giving their input in other ways, that my biggest concern is kind of veering off track and losing focus of the big picture of what we're trying to achieve.
Okay. So you say never? That's your vote?
If that's my option, yes.
What would you pick? Would you create a different option?
I think I would be able to give a more informed decision if I knew what that subcommittee structure looked like.
Let's assume that the subcommittee structure was a good subcommittee structure, because you're all brilliant and you're gonna come up with a good one. Would you want them then?
yes, then that's something that I think could be a good strategy.
So, okay, if well-formed, you say yes, right? And you
Right.
said yes now, or yes later?
Now,
Now? Julie Thomas, now, later, never.
I say now, but I'm saying that because I'm going to say no to something later, which is about inviting outside entities. I think the subcommittee should be used to pull together that information. We need to get law enforcement in, like, I'm thinking facility right now because that's first and foremost what we have to do. So I'm a yes now.
You're a yes now. Peter?
Unconditional now.
Now. Jennifer?
now,
Sam?
Now with this group,
Now with, what's that?
this group, within this group, I think we need to make the subcommittees out of this group.
Yeah, oh, okay. So subcommittees only CJRC, right?
Yes.
No outside entities. Okay. Karen?
Never, unless they have specific purposes and goals.
So we are going to assume that they are well-informed and structured.
Yeah,
because-
I can't assume that. So
Well,
I'm
you
a
guys
never.
are doing it. You guys are doing the work.
Then I'm a never. I'm a never.
You're, because you think this group won't come up with.
I think it will be hard.
Okay, so Karen is a never, because not. Okay. Yeah, is that fair?
Yep.
Okay. Michael, same?
Sure.
One and the same, okay. Catherine?
I have real concerns about subcommittees, not because I don't trust everybody here, but because we all take away different things from what we hear.
Yeah.
I worry very much about us splintering into silos,
Okay,
and so I am at least a not right now.
okay.
I will say that when I read the list of potential subcommittees, I didn't see anything about civil justice in there at all, and that caused me great concern,
Whereas,
which is probably affecting my vote
okay, so,
honest.
at all.
if there is a civil justice committee, you would vote yes?
No, but I would consider it more.
Okay. Okay.
And I'm not opposed to reconsidering this in 2 to 3 months. What I might propose is something along, and I'm sorry, not turning this on. I apologize. What I would ideally propose is that we start off with subcommittees comprised just of this membership group, as Commander Crowe said, and then we have each subcommittee come up with what they think their mission is and what other members they'd like to invite, and we work just within us for the first couple of months, and then say at the 3-month mark, we expand our membership of the subcommittees to pull in other people. But I think we need to do the hard work first of figuring out what it is we're supposed to do. And I would only be in favor of subcommittees if basically they had no ability to make decisions, but only recommendations.
And that would be the case. The subcommittees would
well-
have to, because this whole body is just a recommending body.
Those are my thoughts.
Okay, so if they are recommending only, you're trying. Well, no, I'm trying to understand. So you're saying recommend only, right? That you think subcommittees, if formed, should be recommend only.
I'm saying that I think it's a little premature because we need to figure out what subcommittees we want. And I can't answer that question until we've talked about the subcommittees that we want, because I don't see of the list that was on here. For example, we're talking about a leadership committee that doesn't have anyone from the legal system on it. To me, that doesn't make any sense whatsoever. We're talking about a case management system that has judges and a prosecutor, but no public defender. That doesn't make any sense to me.
That's, okay, so one of the questions was, do you support the structure? So
That's a hard no.
that's a hard no, gotcha. Okay, so.
But I can't give you a yes until we come up with subcommittee
So
structure that works for every.
backwards. You want to form the
Yes.
subcommittees, and then, once you like the subcommittees, you're ready to go with the subcommittees, right? Okay.
With some qualms that they can make recommendations back to this group, stay in frequent communication with this group and make recommendations to this group, but I don't want any surprises. Does that make sense? I want subcommittees to understand that they are gathering information and distilling research and bringing it back to this group.
Gotcha.
I don't feel like if I'm chairing a subcommittee on civil justice, we write a report, you all just have to adopt it. That's not what I'm envisioning.
I'd be shocked if
I-
anybody at the table thought
I-
that they.
As a lawyer, as are you, I got to be clear, and those are my thoughts.
Okay, gotcha. I think I got you on that. So, April.
I think subcommittees could have value as long as they're task specific and work independently. I think the concern that I have is one of the challenges we have in the justice system is we work in information silos. We all work in our space. We know the information that we have and we make decisions based on the information that we have. If we want a chance at real collaboration, at real reform, then I think we need to work together, which is actually something Eve Hill talks about. A successful effort will usually involve a county-wide team, including people responsible for budget, key leaders from the justice system, and key leaders from the service provider system with a clear mandate and commitment to making needed changes. And I think that's what we have right now. If we start creating subcommittees, my concern is we're replicating the problems that currently exist. For example, a facility is a good one. A facility is so interconnected with so many of the different buildings. Judges remand people from the courtroom to the jail. You have someone who's placed on home detention directly from the courtroom. You have someone who's directed to go to probation. You have prosecutors and public defenders, and you have probation who are appearing for hearings, and all of them are interacting all the time. If you just have a facility committee, you may miss some voices who are trying to make recommendations for release that are looking for programming within that facility. I think the facility committee is everyone at this table.
Yeah.
And I think Eve Hill also talks about making sure you don't have duplicative committees, that it can be burdensome for having too many committees. And I think one other thing that we've talked to consider is that the justice system is a lot of components. We need to stay focused on a particular task, talk about it as a group, so we make sure we can make a comprehensive and practical decision. And I think we need to prioritize and have these meetings focused on topics, a singular topic where we can get out each of our ideas.
Yeah, okay, so just trying to summarize on this answer, subcommittees. You are, if done well, would that be a summary? If done well, you would like subcommittees?
No, I think you can have a subcommittee if it can be task specific.
Okay.
And it can work independent. The only one that I can think of that can operate at this time under both of that criteria is a civil justice subcommittee. Other than that, we haven't even spoken about transportation or the interconnectedness of all of the different agencies. So to split up to try to solve a problem within a subcommittee before we know the problems is, I think is going to be very difficult and maybe not as productive.
Would you, if in one of these categories, are you a now, a later, or never, or maybe were you later? Would you be a later?
I think now for civil justice,
Okay.
I don't know if that's like a half a mark or, because I think ultimately you're going to tally it at the end. So I just want to get my
Well,
caveat in.
I'm
Yeah.
trying to get you guys, I'm trying to understand where you're at, because I'm not sure everybody's at the same place.
Yeah.
With subcommittees, I'm trying to understand where people are at. And you are, I'm just trying to get you a general feel, now, later, or never. And I'm not hearing never. And I'm hearing maybe now on some if task oriented. We do operate in information silos. We need to collaborate. So again, if we can figure out how to do the subcommittees well, you might be in favor.
I think my answer is what I think captures the dimensions of it. So I'm just going to stand by.
Gotcha. Okay, Darcy.
I mean, I think to some extent we need subcommittees so we could be more efficient. We haven't yet to make it all the way through an agenda, I think, efficiently.
Okay.
So I think having a big group like this could make it problematic, but I'm not ready to say yes
Okay.
until I still don't have a clear vision as to what it is we're trying to do anyway. So I don't, a subcommittee for what? I don't know yet.
So maybe later. Are you, if you had to pick.
Maybe
one,
later.
Maybe later. Maybe. Maybe. Kara, you got a thought?
Yeah, I agree with Darcy. I mean, when you read the report, it talks about substance abuse and mental health. And we had kind of talked at other meetings about we should put our resources there. So until we figure out if we're going to put resources there, I don't think we know what kind of jail we're going to build, if we're going to build a jail. Because that affects the size. If you were going to spend money on the community end of things,
Yeah.
you could reduce the size of whatever you're building.
Right.
So maybe because I came in late, I don't know.
We're going to keep going around the table. So.
Okay,
yeah,
I'm later.
Yeah, no, I get that. I was just thinking, yeah.
And I will say,
Oh, absolutely. It's hard to eat an elephant all in one bite, for sure. And so, and yes, your point is exactly right. And Lee and I had talked about this. Those of Mary Ellen, I think, was the only judge who was at the table 2.5 years ago when these consultants were hired. And the thought was, because Ken Falk said, hey, you guys need a new jail. And the commissioners, like, we don't want to just build a new jail. We want to work on our processing. So hopefully work on substance abuse, work on community issues, hopefully reduce the need or the demand so that we don't have to build a bigger jail. Maybe we can change our processes. That was 2.5 years ago. We did the studies. We've gotten them. Hopefully everybody's read them. And one of the things they say is, yes, you need a new facility. Question, as Jeff said, is what size? What are we going to do pre and post incarceration to hopefully, reduce the need for the jail? But I'm not sure that everybody's, and again, I'm not sure everybody is on board with the new facility. Maybe everybody is. But at the last meeting, we were talking about should we have subcommittees, because Phil recommended some subcommittees in a report, and I wanted to know what you guys thought about that. And so I'm just trying to get some thoughts on that.
My only issue with subcommittees is I feel like we're not going to get all the information. Like at the last meeting, we thought we had 80 some acres that we were going to build.
Yeah.
Now it's 30 some buildable acres. So if we have subcommittees that are talking about facilities or whatever, we're not all going to get that.
Yeah.
That's my,
Yeah,
so that's why I think later would be better.
I think, okay. You think later, okay, so if you had to vote, you'd say later, and your concern is CJRC won't get all the information, right? Lee,
Yes. I'm going to say now, because this isn't set in stone, it wouldn't, if things seem to be not going well, we have the option of changing it. I also believe a part of the ordinance is that there will be subcommittees. And I guess we could change the ordinance, but we've already done that once. And I guess what I had envisioned and thought would be fairly obvious is that all subcommittees would report back to the entire group, so that the subcommittees are just acting as agents to collect information in a more efficient manner than we can with the entire group, and then get all of that information back to all of us.
Julie, is that consistent with what you were thinking? Yes. Okay. And I also thought that the subcommittees would go out there and do some work in between meetings and bring that back to this group. So if they are agents to collect more information, gather more information, bring back to this subcommittee, that's what you were thinking, that's what you were thinking. Is that generally what you guys thought a subcommittee might do? Anybody over here on this end, the judges?
I think it depends on what we tell them to do.
Is that what you would, if you had the magic wand, is that what you would tell them to do?
If I had a magic wand, I wouldn't do them yet,
Okay,
as I said earlier.
yeah. Okay. But when you eventually do them, is that what you would have them do?
Yes, if we have subcommittees in the future, I would suggest that we start them with just this committee members, work on the mission, bring that back to the entire committee, make sure we're comfortable with it, and then have them expand their membership and bring that all information back to this committee. I share very much Judge Crothy's concern about not knowing all the information. When I first read the list of committees, honestly, my reaction was, oh my God, I'm gonna have to be on every subcommittee so I know what's going on. And if we have members who want to be on every subcommittee, then I don't think we should have subcommittees. I think we do it as a committee of the whole. That's my impression.
Okay.
And I only have, 24 hours in a day. I don't know if anyone else here has a time machine, but I'd love to hear it.
So I am, is there, I'm gonna try to whittle this down because we already have committee voices for health and some people are gonna have to leave. And we already have this CHIP subcommittee working. I've heard last time some people thought the facility, and I think April, you were in this category, you're like, this is our main priority, facility right now. Is that is whether it's a subcommittee or whether it's a CJRC, who thinks that this should be a focus right now? And I just kind of want a general feeling. Do you guys think, I mean, I know April, you were pretty clear last time, you're like, hey, facility is a priority, right?
And I don't mean that to the exclusion of all the other areas that we need to talk about. It's just the report that came out last year is very clear that we're not maintaining, the facility that's currently in effect cannot maintain constitutional standards of care. And I think we need to prioritize and have concrete goals. And that is a place that we can start.
Okay.
And I think when we talk about the facility, we're going to get into a lot of the ways in which we're all working together, which will address some of the other areas as well. And we're also talking about a $10 million piece of land that's already being evaluated. So I think it's being prioritized, even if we're not.
Okay. Jen, is there anybody that disagrees with that?
No, I don't disagree with that at all. But again, I'll just point out there, with that being said, when you're talking about that, I think, again, I'll just say it, probation needs to be a part of that discussion just the same. And so, yeah, what April said is absolutely head on, because I don't think that we can do anything else until we have the kinks of what exactly are we wanting to do. Because if it's taking this long for us to figure that out, and we still don't have that key component, then I'm concerned that we're going to be spinning in our wheels.
Okay. So anybody else on that topic? Julie?
Yeah, I am concerned as well that, yes, we need to move on facility because we have to make some decisions sooner rather than later. But everything we've talked about has something to do with that facility. And it's about the processes and how many cells we need and how much classroom space we need and how big of a mental health wing do we do, or do we do that as a separate building? All of these huge questions involve everything. But I want all of these components to be focused on the facility first when they're talking about that aspect of what they're doing. We need to hear from law enforcement. We need to hear from former inmates. We need to hear from current inmates. We need to hear from so many people. There's no way we're going to be able to do that in this group and have all these folks coming in if we're only meeting twice a month for 90 minutes. Sorry, it's just not possible. That's my concern. I just don't know how, and I don't think surveys are going to do it. I think we need surveys and.
Yeah.
So that's my take.
So Julie, you say okay. So I want to hear from you guys on some of these other issues because Julie, we haven't gotten to, you just mentioned survey, we haven't gotten that. You said yes, outside entities, but are you thinking some of those outside entities would ever talk in a subcommittee, or are they always coming to this group?
I don't think we have time to have everybody here. I just don't. It'll be 3 years from now before we make a decision, and we don't have that kind of time.
And you're thinking some of those outside entities could come to talk in subcommittees?
Sure. Yeah, they need to talk to that's what I think subcommittees can be good for, is bringing that information together, plus using surveys.
The risk that we run there, though, is of exhausting those groups of folks because they need to talk to all of the committees. Or I should say, all of the subcommittees that I'm seeing would benefit from hearing from the people in those groups.
So you're saying that, which is all of those groups, like law enforcement, would need to talk to all the subcommittees. So that leads me to think that you would rather have them come to this large group Yeah, right. So you don't necessarily support Julie's. Well, I'm just saying, I'm trying to figure if you guys are like-minded or not like-minded.
I recognize the need to move quickly. I just think maybe there's some key groups that we could all benefit from hearing from in this venue and take to the subcommittees. So maybe it's a both directions, communication.
Yeah, I like that idea. And I kind of think that we can start out with a few obvious subcommittees and determine who needs to talk to the subcommittees and who needs to talk to all of us, and see how it proceeds. And if that's not working very well, then we can rethink it. But I think if we spend all our meetings trying to decide whether or not to have subcommittees and who's going to be on them and all of that, Julie's right, it's going to be 3 to 5 years before we get anywhere at all. So, and twice a month for an hour and a half isn't enough time to accomplish that. So anyhow, that's where I'm at.
Yeah.
I frankly agree with everything that's been said here on this last round, but even the question of should we prioritize the facility, we need to know what facility. It's a chicken and an egg question, right? At some point, we just have to bite the bullet and give some answer. And I think that Jeff's presentation made it clear that we have to start with the facility as the jail. We can't include as the facility also all of the courts and all of the public defenders and all of the prosecutors and all of the clerk's office and all of probation, because that isn't in the budget. That's, I think, what I heard Jeff say. So I think that answers the question for us. Now, I have more to say on that topic when we come back around, if we're still doing this, backing around, answering these different questions. I brought some homework, but that's, I think we need to just start with that definition and go.
So I think to add, well, I
Yes.
try and make you happy. One of the complexities that makes this so challenging is that there are moving parts at the state level. And I think that we need to be hearing from people at the state level, because right now there's a recommendation that's going to go to the legislature for a certified community behavioral health clinic system based on Missouri here in Indiana.
Wow.
They're going to be potentially voting on that at the upcoming biennial session. And that's going to have real ramifications on how we're thinking about what we're building, where we're going to be investing our dollars. And that's a big question mark. And I think we need to be hearing from our, that report's going to come out later in October. And I just think we need to be hearing from our state partners, because on some levels, it's been said earlier in this meeting that, we don't have as much power as we think we do.
Could I piggyback onto that? Thank you. I couldn't reach that far. I think probably one of the first subcommittees that we need is a subcommittee to work with the state. The county has hired a lobbyist that works with the state legislature. I think we need to talk to them about what concerns we have about, I think we'd very likely need to lobby about the possibility of these new mental health facilities. And that's something that we can't really sit on our hands. That happens when it happens.
I think a written report would do just as well as a subcommittee from whomever, staff or whomever.
About the stuff that's coming out of.
That's exactly right. I don't know we need to hear a presentation about pending legislation, but receiving a written report would be helpful.
I would second that. And I would say that I think we need to just decide that we need to start talking about a facility. And even if the scale of that goes up or down after that report, we can start talking about what we want to see in that facility and start making some concrete plans. Because I think we have got to move on this.
Could I make a suggestion that we bring our lobbyist here for a meeting to hear from everyone that's sitting at this table about what you want to see in legislation. It doesn't mean it's going to happen, obviously, but I think everyone here would probably have some really great suggestions, and it would only take 15 minutes. I mean, I just think it would be really helpful to have because he works for the county, commissioners and council, but I think he works for the whole county as far as I'm concerned, and that would be my recommendation,
So like at the next meeting, would you want the lobbyists to come?
to check his schedule. But long before the session begins, yes.
Yeah. And he probably has more time now before the session.
Anybody have a
begins.
big giant objection to the lobbyists coming to this group?
I don't have an objection, but I did want to add a topic maybe for the next agenda. If we could spend one meeting where we solely talk about some of the transportation challenges. And by that, I mean, from the presentation tonight, I think it's clear that it's only going to be a jail. And I understand that that's what the financial limitations are, but there are some things that we should talk about that are going to affect the facility. For example, you need to increase the technological capacities of it so we can do some Zoom hearings. There's a lot of interconnectedness that goes on, and I think having some people at this table share some of those challenges, people who are not going to have the ability to pay for a bus from the jail, trying to get from the jail to probation, trying to get from jail to community corrections, day reporting for people who may not have the ability to pay for that. If we could just spend one meeting talking about those things, I think that might limit and keep us on a concrete goal.
And one of the questions, and one of the things I would add to that is I would really like to hear about the viability of doing electronic hearings using Zoom. I don't know what is viable or not. And I would, yes, she has the information, but I wonder, because we are, as part of that transportation, it's about moving inmates to the courts. And no matter what, we're going to have to do that, whether we ever build anything else on this site or not, at least for the short term, we're going to have to move inmates. And so that's part of the issue. And I would love to hear from corrections officers about that, because I imagine that that is an incredibly dangerous thing to be doing too. So, I think that's part of those questions.
If I can, what I'm going to do is just pass these around and just highlight them in 30 seconds or less. So if you would each take one and pass it around. These are not my words. These are all complete quotes from the centers, and the URLs are on there if you want to go look up the entire document. I didn't want to give you each a 400-page research study or a 200-page research study. So I just clipped out the parts that were about co-location, because I think that's our first question. Although I think Jeff had just answered it. At our last meeting, Judge Fawcett mentioned that we had talked about Zoom at our judicial conference, and I want to make clear that it was that Justice David, now retired Justice David, was talking about there are still some judges in the state doing Zoom hearings from home rather than Zoom hearings from the courtroom, and that's not something that he prefers, but that in fact, the Supreme Court has been very supportive of doing court by Zoom, as long as the judge is in the courtroom and we still maintain the formalities and et cetera. I would also note that the National Center for State Courts, in these two different publications, and I have one more here, sorry for you, April, if you would take one and pass it, talking about the pros and cons of co-location. I am, as a civil judge, very concerned about my litigants being able to get to court if court is way out of town. I'm just really concerned about it, and I don't know that transportation can solve that. I will be happy to be convinced. My job as a judge is to stay open-minded, so I will stay open-minded. I'm going to have to see it. So I have a concern about co-location, and I think these articles will address it. I also think that we need to consider that not every county in the state, in fact, I think it's a minority of counties, have the jail and the courts co-located. Most of them do some type of transport. Many of them are starting to do things where like they will take all of the inmates who are heading to court for that day ever at once and keep them in holding cells at the court. So you don't have to be going back and forth and back and forth and back and forth. Obviously, Commander Crow here is the expert on that. I am not, but I wanted to just bring that up as an alternative. It does not have to be an all or nothing kind of a situation. So now I'm done.
Okay, so thank you for that information. As you point out, Jeff said pretty much budget is going to drive the decision. At first, April talked about just having a meeting where we solely talk about transportation. I know that you two commissioners have already talked about transportation, right? You've already talked to BT. You feel pretty confident that transportation is not going to be a deal breaker, correct?
But there are other solutions than that. I think that to slow everything down, to discuss just this one aspect, that in the end, this group just makes recommendations to the commissioners, and we have to do whatever we make the decision, basically. And I think that there's some areas where we need to just, I am not going to say anything to any of the judges or anyone like that about continuances. That is not something that I'm qualified to talk about. We've had quite a bit of experience dealing with transportation in several different ways. So, I think this is a problem that will get worked out as we go along.
Can I just ask just a quick question? Just out of curiosity, because like for public that are here and public that are watching, and honestly for myself, I keep hearing in this discussion that we're in a race against time and a crunch time and things like that. I think it's giving, I'm a little hesitant to like just go ahead and just rush and do this thing. Just simply because I really think we need to take our time. So I guess my question is, and obviously not 20 years or anything like that, but it's given me great pause as for us to just rush and just get this stuff done because we need to have it and that's all and go home. Like what exactly is, what's the rush? If I could say, like, I know it might sound like a silly question, but I just want to ask because I know the legalities of it, but I also know that there is nothing set in stone that has a required, if you don't do it by December 25th of 2022, we're all doomed and gloom. And that's where it's given me great pause.
No, I think that's a great question. I'm glad you are saying that out loud. Yes.
So for 10 years, we've been under suit. And if we are not making progress, it could very well be that someone steps in, like the feds, and builds a jail we don't want, that's bigger than we want, that's way more expensive and has no program space and we're worse off than we started, but all of the taxpayers of this county would have to pay for that. And so what we're trying to do is take the initiative, move forward. I think if we're moving forward, and I think, getting property looked at, reviewed, surveyed, core drilled, all of that good stuff is a good indicator that we're serious, right? And I think we just have to ensure that the ACLU understands that we are serious and we are going to move forward. But I don't think we have an infinite amount of time either. And it will be very difficult to walk that very fine line. I get what you're saying. I don't want to rush and make a mistake. I want to get all the information we can as quickly as we can, though. And if there's a way to do that, I hope that we do that, because we don't want to be in a position where we have to do something rashly. We don't want to have to do that. And we certainly don't want to have a decision made for us, and it's not one that we support as a community. We want to be different. And if we want to be different, we need to get all this input and get this information as soon as we can.
I would also say that we have to keep in mind that there are real people who are in our jail during all this time while we're trying to work things out. And I think that needs to be a part of what we're thinking about.
I hear everybody here say we want to build something. I mean, we're gonna, but the question is, what are we building? Right? How many beds? Is it going to be more beds? The same number of beds? Fewer beds? That's a question. We talked a little bit with Jeff about beds. So when people ask me and I hear people say, yes, build the dang jail, just build the dang jail already. Then I hear people say, not in Monroe County with my taxpayer dollars, don't build the dang jail. So we have people who vote in this community, who live in this community, who are on both sides of the spectrum. So the question is, what are you going to build? All of you may already have your idea of what you think it is, but I do think at the last meeting we talked about, hey, should we get public input and how do we get that? And you know, as simple a question as, do we put something on the website that says people can give their public opinion? I don't know whether this group supports that or not. The commissioners decided, and they would like a recommendation, or I'd like them to have a recommendation from you guys. It's very simple for them to call TSD and say, I want something on the website. But I don't know whether you guys think that's a good idea or not. And they want a recommendation from you.
Right. So the commissioners, just correct me if I'm wrong, they ultimately decide what we're going to build, if anything.
Yeah.
And the council has to appropriate the money to do it.
And then, but I still go back to, I think what would be helpful for us is to have some confines to work within. It's just so like,
I
we're
know,
just we're going.
Right, which is why I want to know, do you philosophically want a bigger jail, a smaller jail, or the same size? Do you have an opinion that, because that's what Jeff Cockrell, Jeff Cockrell said, that one of the first things we have to decide, he has told me privately, he said it here today at the meeting, one of the first things we have to decide is the size.
I say as small as we legally can get away with. The fewest, let me put it this way, the fewest cells we can legally get away with, but the most classroom space, resource space that we can afford.
What's your opinion? Yeah. Now, so the decision about, the Department of Corrections doesn't tell you necessarily what size of jail to build. And I had a nice conversation. I'm going to be talking to him again tomorrow. Bill Wilson, who used to be our jail commander, is working at this level of state. And, you know, the size of facilities gets to be decided locally. And so you guys, you love that decision. You hate having to make that decision. But Jeff said, as he sat right there today, that's one of the first decision points you have to make. So again, Monroe County's going to build something. They're buying land. They're going to buy it by the end of the year. They're going to design something in 2023. They're going to build it in 2024. It's going to be open in 2025. What does that place look like? That's the question. Kate, do you? I'm hearing that. I heard that timeline from Jeff. I've heard it before. I think that's the timeline that commissioners think is a realistic timeline. Something's going to be built. And they really want some input from this committee about what that facility is going to look like. We heard today from Jeff, that's the first time I heard from Jeff say, it's got to be just the correctional center, maybe some courtroom space in the sheriff, because we don't have the money to build it all. So that's good to know. I didn't know that before today.
So if that's our first decision point, could we have a meeting where we just talk about that?
I don't know that we have to have a meeting to just talk about that. If that's.
I
what
mean, our next
money
meeting,
says.
I know we're trying to get a lot of it because there's so much to cover. I was just wondering if at our next meeting, that could be the topic of discussion.
Well, let me ask you, should that be a topic of conversation if the budget's already dictating that? You mean like?
I thought you said the first decision, and I might have heard it wrong, that the first decision
You're
point was
talking
the
about
size of the
The
jail.
size.
Oh, you're
So
talking
if
about
that's
size.
the first decision point as shared today, then could we
I was
have,
thinking you were talking about the co-location. You're talking the size.
yes,
So yeah, sure. And
Well-
I was, and
I am, right.
yes, so what you're saying is, April, this question right here, number of beds, it can either be, it can be more beds than we have, it can be fewer beds than we have, it can be the same number of beds. So you want to have a meeting to talk about that? Is that your suggestion?
It just seems like we're trying to find a place to start, and that's the first decision point. Maybe we could just focus that meeting solely on the discussion to keep
Yes.
us on a goal.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes.
Yeah.
And so I know that I've talked to the commission before, and I know that they support the smallest facility we possibly can get away with. And I was generally going to read the room and just see if you had a sense, if anybody, because these guys have a strong opinion already. See if anybody else had a strong opinion. Yes.
I loved what Julie said about the smallest number of beds and the more resources. I have to say, to me, that sums it up. With my only caveat being that I don't want to underplan to the point that we're kicking ourselves in 5 to 10 years.
Right.
And so when we look at the numbers that we heard today, our inmates have averaged anywhere between, let's say, I'm going to start with 240 and 280 as our average number pre-COVID and during COVID, with the exception of the worst time of COVID when the judges were doing everything possible to get people out on the street. And if we go to 280, we multiply it by 1.2, that's 336 beds. I'm going to suggest that that's our starting number. I don't know that that's our ending number, but that's our starting number to think about.
Is it legal to have a meeting with the Board of Judges here if we notice the meeting? Is there?
They're not subject to that.
So, okay, so they could, I want the judges here for this discussion. I want all of them if possible, because this is, yeah, I mean, but if we can get to that low number during COVID, why can't we keep to that low number? They were making
Because
tough
at that point,
decisions.
I get it, they were making different decisions than they normally do about public safety versus incarceration because of COVID. I can't speak to the individual decisions that were made, but I can say that you've seen the numbers go back up since then. Now, I'm not saying that I want to get in an argument right now about 300 versus 336 or 280 versus 336, but if we start thinking about that, then let's make a list of the other resources we want and think about how we can get that number down by using those other resources. Because I think we're all on the same goal, as few beds as possible and as many resources as possible. I am 100% there with you.
How about you, Sam?
I've been at the jail for 27 years. I've seen the times when we've been close to 400 people, and then I've seen the times when we've been at 180 people. I would much rather be prepared than have to try to struggle and put people on cots on the floor. Now, I realize right now, and I've always said this, if we build another jail, if we build a bigger jail, it's kind of like the Field of Dreams. If you build it, they're going to fill it. I really love the idea that Hamilton County did. They have half of their space that's not finished yet. So if we do have to put more cells in, we have that availability. But I would rather err kind of on the side of caution than try to go too small. So the 336, I was thinking 350. And I can bring statistics, every day's population for the past 15 years to show what the high levels were and what the low levels were. But
Can you get that together for us?
The reason I'm suggesting we start with a number but not write it in stone yet is because we don't know all the factors yet. We don't know
That's
what the state
exactly
is
right.
going to do. But I think we need to start saying for every 10 beds, we want a resource room, or for every 20 beds, we want a resource room. But let us start getting that list together so that if we end up saying, oh, the state is going to make X amount of mental health facilities available, great, let's build that on the same plot of land, then we can pivot to that. But I think we have to start somewhere and build out the rest of what we want so that then we know if we can bring that number down or up.
And we don't approve our budget till the end of October. And we still don't have zoning, an answer on the zoning issue from the city. There's a whole lot of questions. And I think a preeminent question in my mind about number of beds is, what is the state going to do about those who have a diagnosed mental illness but are still a threat to themselves or others that are in our jail? And we know that county jails are being treated like mental health centers right now. What is the state going to do? And I think that's a huge question mark in my mind. Like, if we build a really big facility, is it going to be like Commander Crow was just saying, it's going to be the same story all over again, and we're going back here, talking about this. I know we can't, go through this process trying to guess what the state's going to say or use that, but still, like, I think that's another reason why I think someone at the state level should be here, because it's a recognized issue that mental health in our jails is something that needs to be addressed. I need to go.
So I do want, it's 6 o'clock, so I want to make sure we
get out of here. Here's a question though, that the commissioners do need to hear from you. That idea of having some link on the website for the public to give their opinion. Raise your hand if you like that idea.
As long as it doesn't go into like a black hole of nothing where we don't hear from somebody. I think that's, or, I mean, what else would they be making comment? Real quick, I would also,
You're not, I've heard, no, I've heard we should not, I've heard
No.
opinions of, no,
Yeah.
no. Why should we take an opinion when you're not a jail builder, when you don't know that?
I think, again, as we said last week in our meetings, we need to have opinions and thoughts of people who don't think like us.
Yeah.
And I think that's so big. And just real quick, I'll just say real fast, that I think even maybe once we silo, like kind of narrow down our meetings, I would like to, if people are going to come to these meetings, take a couple of minutes where each person gives like 2 minutes and says something. I think it's only fair that folks show up. Obviously, they have opinions, whether, you know, it's for or against whatever it is that we're saying. It gives us food for thought. So if they're going to show up, we should listen to them.
So you would like not only public input on the website, but doesn't go to black hole, you'd like public comment at these meetings.
Wholeheartedly agree. As long, like everybody, like, as long as we can give like a time limit, because I'm sure like if we had a whole list of people here, we'd be here till probably midnight.
Yeah, so time.
Right, but I do feel like we should be of the mindset to listen to people's input, whether that's on the website or when they come in person.
Is there anything on the table where we could build a mental health facility in Bloomington, like take the Stride Center, expand it, make that part of our planning? Because if we're going to talk about it, I think we need to build it. Because I'll tell you what, the Stride Center's been great, but Centerstone doesn't have the capacity to do what we need. The state hospitals don't have the capacity to do what we need. I talked to Judge Hazeman, who's on the board for our local National Alliance for the Mentally Ill, and she's like, I have people who are decompensating because of mental health issues in the jail, and they can't help them, and there's nowhere to send them.
But
And that is making them permanently worse.
there's no structure administratively and fiscally to support building something like that locally. And that's what we're dependent on the state to hopefully put in place. Because right now there is no way for people providing that type of care and level of service to be reimbursed.
And I think that came up in the Centerstone conversation, is having a model of reimbursement, a waiver system. You know, I'm out of my depth a little bit here, but I don't think that we can have waiver services for incarcerated individuals.
We can't. Right.
Yeah. and-
What if it's not incarceration? That's what I'm saying, is it's
Yeah,
not a
they have to
jail.
have- It's a federal
don't
rule.
think
They
it
have to have freedom of movement. And I had a
Right.
Zoom conversation on Friday with Becky Bruner. with
Yeah,
SSA.
yeah.
And before that, I talked with a Zoom meeting for Doug Hunsinger. You have to have freedom of movement, which can't be a jail facility. And I asked the question, what if they're court ordered there? Right? What if it's a separate facility, not the jail, they're court ordered there? And they didn't know the answer to that question. The question, they're gonna run it through their loop, but they don't know if being court ordered there is a restriction on freedom of movement. But they think it probably is, but they're.
It's a good question. And I'd be interested to hear, you know, the prosecutor's office, like what they have to say about this, because I know there's a lot of pressure there too.
Yeah.
All right.
So you can't get Medicaid, if that's what you're talking about, the Medicaid stream, you can't get it for a correctional center. It's got to be a community-based facility, not a Monroe County Correctional Center.
And if we have something like that, that could reduce the bed population as well. And I keep hearing us talk about how we're waiting on the state. And I know that we're waiting on the state, but we wait on state for a whole bunch of stuff. I think we're progressive in our ways that we can actually do something like this, where we fund more mental health facilities and treatment centers so that we don't have to get there, because by the time they already have gotten to the facility, which is the jail, it's too late.
That's the health focus.
That's the part.
health focus.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And initially, when this group was first formed and was much smaller, the intention was to work more on that aspect of thing and also recidivism. and not worry about a jail until we could see how much we could bring the population down that way. It now seems fairly obvious that we can't wait that long, but I think we really need to try to think about both of these things hand in hand as we're moving along, so that keeping in mind all the time that what we want to do is decrease the population rather, but at the same time have a constitutional, hopefully more pleasant building. Yes, yes. No. Right. And actually, when the facility was built, I'm quite sure there was more room for that. What happened was a whole lot of that room got converted to have extra space for beds. So I think this is something that we want to keep in mind when we're thinking about all of this is, and that's why I like the idea of being able to easily expand so that that can be the direction we go rather than converting programming space.
I thought we said there wasn't any money for health. Didn't I just hear that? We don't have mental health money. Because that's like diversion and all that, all those programs cost money. So that's kind of what I'd like to know. Is there money for these programs?
Yes, yes,
Okay.
we've put that into the ARPA plan. There is money available for that, and it's just that we're going to fund the jail from a different source.
Okay, but we could start that now. We don't have to wait for them.
We absolutely could, and I believe we should.
Okay.
And over time, one of the ideas of working with IU long-term partnerships, for instance, the health program already has a great relationship. And if you're, if you realize that people are, are ill and the public health focus, you could, with the health department and the school of public health, increase the levy. They have a separate tax levy. So you could increase, you could shift your tax levy from eventually, you don't lead with, I'm cutting this budget, but you lead with, we're going to expand this budget. And eventually over time, your focus has shifted from, we're going to work with people who are addicted in our community. It might be the division of mental health. Again, every county has a health department, every county has FSSA office for that. But between FSSA and at the state, I found out that the state health department, state FSSA are talking, trying to figure out what they're going to do with that opioid money too. So the idea is, I think if you focus on long-term IU partnerships for research and clinic, and you but takes this, sort of, she's already got, they already have a stuff. This month, you have another subcommittee meeting, right? So, community voices for health is meeting right now. Is we worked with our health department and did a community health improvement plan. And one of their, they came up with 3 top services in Monroe County, like you survey. And one of those was substance. And so that's something I go to that. And one of my ideas was that somebody from here could start going to that and then report back to this committee. I could certainly report back to one meeting I attended. A whole lot of social workers on it, anybody can show up, join that subcommittee. But that committee report back, because I don't know that we need to reinvent the wheel and come up with a subcommittee on substance use, because the health department's already doing it. And they did it after a giant community survey with community voices, hospital foundation. So, so again, I can send you guys the data that's subcommittee. Okay. All right. Thanks, guys. Yeah, Sam. You're gonna use that for us? Okay. Yeah.
In Hancock County, Hendricks County, Hancock County, we can do them both on the same day. They've given me dates of October 26th and October 27th, if we want to get a group together to do that.
October 21st is your mental health summit. Geographic Mental Health Summit, so that would be 26th and 27th would be the next week.
It'd be Wednesday and Thursday of next week.
Yes. They're both newer jails, so it'll give, it, again, a good opportunity to see a brand new jail.
Yeah, we're adjourned. Pardon?